Biden campaigned for president on fighting climate change. And it's true that his administration revoked with a flourish the permits for the Keystone XL pipeline on the first day of his administration. But what's been going on with less fanfare since then? Lawyers within his administration are currently defending mining and oil projects, such as Willow Oil Project in Alaska, the Resolution Copper Mining Project in Arizona, and the Dakota Access Pipeline from North Dakota to Illinois. Because these projects run through federal lands and water crossings, they need federal approval. Companies that stand to benefit from potentially favorable court rulings are ConocoPhillips, Rio Tinto plc, BHP Group, and others. These projects would continue dumping greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, accelerating global heating. They would pollute local water supplies and desecrate lands that are considered sacred by indigenous groups. Various indigenous, environmental, and local community groups have been active in speaking out against these projects. Ultimately, our fate on such issues doesn't reside in the courts. Beyond focusing exclusively on slowing down this or that mining or oil project, when we look at the state of the world, with year after year continuing to be the hottest on record, why is there any discussion about expanding any fossil fuel projects? What is it about the system that we live in that values the fossil fuel industry's addiction to profits above our survival on this planet? This is an addiction that doesn't disappear if the personnel in the White House change or a court rules one way or the other. How long will we allow ourselves to be held hostage by such an insane system? State legislatures controlled by the Republican Party have been feverishly rewriting election laws to make it harder to vote. They aim to suppress the votes of parts of the population, especially black people, who turned out in large numbers to defeat Donald Trump. For example, the Georgia GOP passed a law that makes it a crime to give water to voters waiting in line, and at the same time, it reduced the number of polling places in black neighborhoods, guaranteeing longer wait times to vote. The Democratic Party loudly protests these efforts at voter suppression. In Texas, Democratic Party legislatures walked out of the state capitol, successfully delaying passage of a voter suppression law for the time being. The Democrats make a big show of defending the right to vote in states where their representatives are in the minority, but it's a different story in Washington, where the Democrats control the national government. Congressional Democrats have proposed laws that would counter many forms of voter suppression, but they haven't passed them. Their excuse is that the Senate has a rule called the filibuster, which means it takes 60 votes to pass a law over GOP objections. The Democrats only have a bare majority of 51 votes. But 51 votes are enough to change the rules to eliminate the filibuster, yet so far the Democrats are refusing to do this. If they abolish the filibuster, there'd be no barrier to passing laws to implement all the promises they've made. The filibuster is a handy excuse for not taking action. Maybe that's the reason the Democrats didn't do away with it long ago. The filibuster has been around for many decades. In the 60s, it was the last line of defense used by racist politicians to try to stop passage of civil rights laws. During those years, there were huge mass movements demanding change. These movements were powerful enough that Congress was forced to pass voting rights laws and lots of other popular reforms like Medicare, despite the filibuster. Today, millions of people are angry about growing inequality and the deteriorating conditions in the neighborhoods where we live and where we work. Like in the 1960s, if we want big changes, we can't wait for politicians to act. The only way fundamental changes get made is when large numbers of people rise up together and shake the system. June is Pride Month, the annual celebration of the struggles of LGBTQ people for equal rights. It also calls us to continue the fight and remember the distance we still have to go. Nothing could be made this clearer than the Biden administration's decision to side with religious schools' discrimination against LGBTQ students. 33 LGBTQ people who are past or current students at conservative Christian colleges and universities have filed suit against the U.S. Department of Education for allowing discriminatory practices at those schools. The lawsuit says, the department's inaction leaves students unprotected from the harms of conversion therapy, expulsion, denial of housing and healthcare, sexual and physical abuse and harassment, as well as the less visible but no less damaging consequences of institutionalized shame, fear, anxiety, and loneliness. The Education Department's behavior is based on Title IX, part of a federal law that bans such discrimination, but allows exemptions for religious institutions. As if that isn't bad enough, the U.S. Department of Justice, led by Attorney General Merrick Garland, says that it can defend the Christian institutions and the Department of Education against the lawsuit. At first, justice officials said that they could do so vigorously. When criticism began to mount, they took out the word vigorously from their statement. But the real problem is that the law places a higher value on some people's religious beliefs than on other people's basic needs for respect, safety, and education. This is like the legal battles over abortion. Politicians in this country are always talking about separating church and state. But this case is another in a long list showing how phony they are. And the politicians of both parties have only done anything for anyone's civil rights when people have forced them to, by organizing and going into the streets, sitting in, going to jail, occupying spaces, and doing whatever it takes to get what we need. It's good to remember this during Pride Month, and every day. As pioneering LGBTQ activist Barbara Giddings said, "Equality means more than passing laws. The struggle is really won in the hearts and minds of the community where it really counts. And that means we need to let our communities know that the struggle continues." Since the pandemic began last year, there have been various programs set up to provide some level of financial assistance for people that have lost incomes. But these programs are beginning to come to an end. The additional $300 per week that people have been receiving in unemployment insurance is set to expire in mid-September throughout the country. However, governors in nearly half of the states are threatening to cut it off at the end of June or sometime in July. This would potentially impact roughly 4 million people. If we turn on the TV or listen to talk radio, we've been hearing the same song over and over. We've probably heard it from our friends and coworkers. We may have even said it ourselves. People don't want to work. There has been story after story in the media about companies that are trying to entice potential employers with signing bonuses, free food, and other gimmicks. We are being told that the reason employers are having a hard time hiring employees is because the people are too comfortable after months of receiving generous unemployment benefits. Are they kidding? Even before the pandemic, some 40% of Americans did not have $400 in savings for an emergency. It is estimated that around 10 million American families are behind on their rents with an average debt of $6,000. Are we supposed to believe that through all the losses felt during the pandemic, that additional $300 per week was enough to allow people who could barely make ends meet somehow live comfortably? What a joke. It's indeed true that people are better off receiving unemployment insurance than going to work, but maybe it's worth asking why. Rather than pointing fingers at unemployed people, as these governors and media talking heads would like us to do, maybe we should ask the question, why aren't there jobs that provide living wages to support a family? Yeah, it's true that people don't want to work. They don't want to work for peanuts. Since the year 2000, the western United States and northern Mexico have been in near perpetual drought. This year is expected to be the driest in the last century and one of the driest of the last millennium. The last few months were the driest for Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah in 126 years. The flow of the Colorado River, the biggest water artery in the 7 western states, is down by 20% in the past 5 years. This mega drought is the worst water crisis the United States has seen in generations. In fact, it's more than a drought, which implies a temporary drying. Scientists are using the term aridification to describe the long-term and permanent drying of the West. The effects on human life are already devastating. Western salmon stocks are shrinking due to declining river flows, farmers are facing crop failures and cattle losses, and reservoirs producing power for human use are at their lowest level in decades. Winter snowpacks this year were well below normal, signaling less water for irrigation for the coming farming season and less fresh water for drinking. Dry, parched land increases the likelihood of another destructive fire season. All these water-related crises increase the price of food and drive more people into poverty. This is not inevitable, but an effect of irrational planning in an economy that makes no sense. For example, California, the largest state in the United States, produces the majority of the nation's fruits, vegetables, and nuts. Yet it is one of the warmest and driest states, an extreme example of the insanity of U.S. water policy. The Western mega drought is a huge red flag for us to stop the destruction of the environment we all depend on for life. Our planet is entering an era of mass extinction. The last mass extinction was 66 million years ago. Today, the rate of extinction is hundreds of times faster than it would have been naturally, that is, without the petrochemical industries, deforestation, overfishing, and other effects of capitalism. Most of the arable land has already been destroyed by the pollution and overproduction of capitalist industries, and a third of the world's people already lack access to clean drinking water. Capitalism is a system based on corporate growth, overproduction, and exploitation of more and more natural resources. In the pursuit of profit and growth, there's no stopping environmental destruction. The apologists of this system celebrate the prosperity it offers. Indeed, it offers wealth for some, while keeping the majority in poverty. However, this voracious capitalist system is reaching the limits of the planet's ecosystem and is destroying its very foundation. When the environment is so devastated that we cannot grow food and drink water, there will be no prosperity for anyone, will be extinct. This system has growth and environmental destruction built into it. The capitalists and their politicians will not abandon the system that maintains their wealth and privilege. Only we, the people who make the system run through our daily work, can stop this insanity. Only by getting rid of capitalism can we bring this madness to an end. The scientists warn us that we have little over a decade to stop the industrial pollution causing climate change. We must act now to build the organizations necessary to save our planet and ourselves. Kamala Harris has been criticized for her message to the people of Guatemala to avoid immigration to the United States. "Do not come," she said. "I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back." Of course, the statement is callous, but it will do nothing to deter immigration. What matters is the policy of the Biden administration that is behind that statement. And this policy is unsurprisingly similar to that of the Trump and Obama administrations. They will send Homeland Security officers to Guatemala to train local officials so that they can police the Guatemalan population and stop people from fleeing their home country. Kamala Harris understands why so many people are immigrating into the United States. She said, "Most people don't want to leave the place they grew up, and when they do leave, it usually has to do with two reasons. Either they're fleeing some harm, or they simply cannot satisfy their basic needs." At least she acknowledges that the poverty in Latin America is the root cause of immigration. However, the proposed solution to that poverty is the standard capitalist one. The Biden administration plans to invest $48 million in entrepreneurship programs, affordable housing, and agricultural businesses in Guatemala, part of a 4-year, $4 billion plan to invest in the region. Ms. Harris last month touted commitments from a dozen private companies, including MasterCard and Microsoft, to develop the economy in Central America. Opening the doors for huge corporations to further exploit the people of Guatemala is just an extension of the same policy that caused all this poverty in the first place. Since the U.S. annexed Texas from Mexico in 1845, the U.S. capitalists have been the real rulers of Latin America. Between 1898 and 1934, the U.S. has used its military power to ensure that companies like United Fruit are the effective government of Guatemala, El Salvador, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Jamaica, and Costa Rica. Hence the racist term Banana Republic. Today, U.S. capitalists dominate all of Latin America. In Guatemala, after decades of slaving for United Fruit, the workers and farmers made a revolution from 44 to 54 to shake off the superexploitation of U.S. corporations. Fearing the loss of profits for the capitalists that he represented, President Eisenhower ordered the CIA and U.S. military to intervene. After a naval blockade and bombing of the capital, the democratically elected government was overthrown, causing a civil war that lasted until 1996. The rule of U.S. corporations was restored at the cost of over 100,000 lives. The same story was repeated with some variations in the other countries of Central and South America, causing millions of deaths, torture, and terror to this day. As Harris admitted, the immigration from Latin America is a result of poverty. What she forgot to mention is that this poverty was imposed in the most violent way by the capitalists who rule the United States. The Biden administration's solution is to tighten the border control and extend the tentacles of U.S. corporations further into the countries they've been preying on for over a century. We know what the result will be because we've seen the solution play out for generations.